In this video, we'll talk a little bit about trigger control and the proper trigger control, how you are going to actuate that trigger. Whether you want to call it pull the trigger or press the trigger or whatever it is you want to do, you need to operate that trigger without adding any additional movement to the sight. That's the key to marksmanship and handgun defensive accuracy. Plus, stick around to the end of this video because we have a gun giveaway that you can enter for free, but it ends really soon. Hi, I'm Kevin Michalowski, Director of Content for the U.S. Concealed Carry Association. If you're new to this channel, we help you prepare for everything you'll encounter before, during, and after a self-defense incident. Now, let's start talking a little bit about trigger control. Because we're using real firearms, I want to make sure that everyone knows these guns are cleared. Notice the actions are locked open. We will visually and physically inspect the chamber to make sure there is no ammunition in that chamber. The magazine is out and empty, and both of these guns are physically and visually inspected and cleared. Magazines are out and empty. We'll be doing some dry fire. There's no ammunition in the room. We'll get ready to go on that now. So, let's talk a little bit about operating the trigger on your firearm. It's trigger control, okay? Trigger finger discipline, muzzle management, and trigger control help keep you on target. I'm going to close the slide on this gun, and we're going to talk a little bit about controlling this trigger. It starts with a good grip that puts your strong hand, the dominant hand that you're going to be using to fire this gun, the gun high up in this grip. We can show this right there. And this is called the tang of the firearm. We want the web of your hand high up on the tang of the firearm. And until you have made a conscious decision to fire, keep your finger off the trigger. So we have our index finger indexed, funny how that works, on the side of the firearm like that. Now, when we're going to get a good, solid, firm, and controllable trigger operation, we drop the trigger finger into the trigger guard, and using the first pad of that finger, that's how we're operating the trigger. We're pressing the trigger straight to the rear using the first pad of that finger. Now, there is going to be some debate about this. Very early on in my firearms training, people were telling me to use the first distal joint on your trigger finger to operate that trigger because it gives you more leverage. That works really good for revolvers when you have that long double action trigger pull. But if we're firing auto-loading pistols, typically what you want to do is have that first pad right there on the end of your finger at the center of the trigger so that you can operate that trigger fully to the rear. So now I'm going to close this action. Again, these firearms have been cleared. There's no ammunition anywhere in the room. This is a dry fire drill. I'm not pointing the gun at anyone. I'm pointing it in the same direction, in a safe direction. We come to full extension. Put your finger on the trigger, first pad on there, and pull it all the way to the rear until you hear that striker fall. You heard the click. Now, on a firearm like this Taurus, it has a resetting trigger. So as I release the trigger, you'll hear the trigger reset. There's that click. Release to the reset. Pull it again. Now we're lining up the sights. We're looking down the sights, and we want to operate that trigger without adding any extra movement to the sight. That's the key, and that's the most important thing you can do when you're dry firing. The reason I have this second firearm here with me, this Kahr Arms, is because when you're doing dry fire with a gun that does not have a resetting trigger, like Kahr Arms, Glock, Springfield Armory, things like that, again, gun is clear. We're going to come up and dry fire this firearm up to full extension, finger on the trigger. You hear the striker hit. Now that trigger's not going to reset until you move the slide gently to the rear. That resets the trigger, and you can do it again. I really enjoy dry firing with a gun that uses a resetting trigger. It makes it so much easier. You don't have to operate the slide all the time, and you might not introduce what we call a training scar, making you want to reach for that slide every time the gun goes off when you're doing dry fire. So again, operating the trigger smoothly, good firing grip, drop the trigger finger down to the trigger with the first pad, pull it all the way to the rear smoothly, let it reset, do it again, and keep repeating without adding any movement to the front sight. The more smoothly you can operate that trigger, the more your sights are going to stay on target, the faster your recovery time is for the second shot on target. So again, operating the trigger smoothly is the key to keeping your gun, your rounds on target. And you can do that with dry fire. Some of the things that can go wrong, certainly if you're not operating the trigger smoothly, jerking it, okay, we want you to press that trigger directly to the rear, anticipating recoil. It's really not part of your trigger operation, but it is something that happens with folks. They sort of anticipate that recoil, so they drop their hands down a little bit. They'll typically shoot low and often to the left if they're right-handed shooters. And if you put too much trigger finger all the way through the trigger guard and you're way too deep in there, you're going to be pulling, and it's going to push your front sight off target. You're going to be squeezing too hard. So we want a good firm grip with the 3 lower fingers, and then your trigger finger simply operates the trigger. That's all it's going to do. And that dry fire drill, just focusing on your front sight. Sometimes we'll tell people to do what's called the wall drill, which an empty firearm, dry fire training, you put it right up against the wall. You're less than an inch away from the wall with your front sight. And you simply come to full extension, you look down that sight, and you operate the trigger without moving the front sight. I saw a little bit of movement to my right on the first shot, and now we're going nice and smoothly. But when you're up against the wall, you can see that front sight and you can make sure that it's not moving. Do that repeatedly until it becomes second nature. Thousands of repetitions to make sure that you're operating the trigger smoothly. A smooth trigger press, smooth trigger operation will help keep your rounds on target. Thanks for staying with me all the way to the end of this video. As promised, we have a gun giveaway, and it's going to end soon. All you have to do is click the link below and reveal which brand new gun you can win. I'm Kevin Michalowski, Director of Content for the U.S. Concealed Carry Association. If you enjoy videos like this, please subscribe to this channel and click that notification bell. We'll notify you every time something new comes out. Stay safe, and we'll see you in the next video.